Hello, everyone. It's nice to see folks out there commenting on the chat wall. Today is going to be a fun hour of us shooting the shit. Some friends here, some founders, some folks in the product-led growth or revenue or whatever you want to call it. Like I've seen some websites now, Tim and Edgar, that are literally just productled.com. I don't know if you've seen these, but it's really, yeah, it's interesting.
That actually has ProductLed.com. They have a 10,000 person Slack community behind
Huge.
ProductLed. So
Yeah.
it's legit. I think that Wes runs that community, and it's a business that he's running as well, which seems quite successful so far.
Cool. Well, this is going to be a pretty chill conversation today. We're going to have a couple people pop in, like my good friend Matthew Bellows, who's just popped in now. All right, what's up? We'll
Great
go
to see you.
around the horn. Good to see you, man. It's really good to see you. And we'll go around the horn here in a second and introduce ourselves. But this is super chill. I haven't put on my shoes in months. I forget to brush my teeth most days. And so Chris, did you okay? Chris, no, it's Chris, you should see an invite on the screen. It's a pop-up. So it's kind of weird. Sometimes it comes up. So sometimes it's a little funky, but today's just there. I think Chris, it's coming through right now. Chris, there we go. Awesome. So we can have up to 6 people on Crowdcast. Shout out to Crowdcast for giving us this platform to use. And today, again, is just going to be a super chill conversation about product-led growth and product-led revenue. I've been calling it product-led revenue. Why don't we take a quick second? I see that Edgar here popped off for a second. So sometimes there's technical difficulties. The internet will. Hey, Sabrina, good to see you. Will not be kind to us at times, right? So that's been happening to all of us. But I'll go ahead and kick it off. My name is George or Jorge. I get both all the time. It's a long story that deals with George Harrison and the St. Louis Cardinals. And if anyone's interested, just DM me on Twitter or LinkedIn. But been doing startups for about 20 years now. It's nuts, even though I look like I'm 15 or so. My current startup that I'm part of is actually out of the Boston area, called Reprise. We're doing product-led technology. I won't make this a pitch for Reprise, so I'll hold back on that. But it's interesting because I've been seeing, product-led experiences for a very, very long time. And this whole category seems to have emerged. I think like the open view folks over in Boston really started to kind of make it a thing. Even though Matt, I know you'll introduce yourself in a second. You've been doing product led in the enterprise and B2B for a very long time with Yesware, but yeah, we're all about empowering or enabling product led experiences, and I think product led has changed a lot over the years. It's expanded, so I'm pretty excited about where it's going and the conversation today. I'll go ahead and hand it over to Tim. Tim, why don't you introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about your background and what are you up to today? Because I know you're helping drive product led.
Sure. Thanks, Jorge, or George, whichever you prefer. I've always said Jorge, but
or Jorge.
I appreciate it. I got to know Jorge many years ago when I joined Twitter through an acquisition, and Jorge had also joined Twitter through an acquisition. So we've stayed in touch over the years. And Matthew, I want to say I might have been like customer number 1 or very early at Yesware. I loved Yesware. I was a huge user of Yesware when it was first out, and so. Great to see you on here.
That's awesome. Yeah, thanks. Tim.
You can look up in a database somewhere, and I'm in there. I don't know. I'd actually be curious to know what customer number I was of Yesware.
I know Ben Sardella was the first paying customer.
Okay, I probably wasn't number 1, but
because he sent me an email and he was like, "Yeah, I can check." That's cool.
All right. So big fan of that. And so yeah, my background, because I use Yesware, you can kind of guess. spent a lot of time doing startups and running commercial teams, built inbound teams, outbound teams. Eventually was part of a company called Tap Commerce, where I was the first enterprise sort of salesperson, founding team member. Ended up building a global team of 20 people there, and we sold to Twitter, and was part of a big group at Twitter as well for a while. Now I'm actually working on my own startup and helping companies with a product-led model, bring together product usage data and sort of the more traditional customer data in Salesforce and other tools like Slack and emailing tools like Yesware as well. So happy to go into more detail. I don't need to make it a pitch, but happy to tell you guys at least a little bit more about sort of what we're hearing from our customers and what we're seeing in the space. But maybe I can pass it over to Matthew for his intro.
Yeah, thanks. Great to see you again, and thank you for the invitation, Jorge. I appreciate it.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I'm old, and I've been doing startups for a long time, and my first company actually was my first sort of greenfield startup that I started was back in 2000, and it was actually a media company. And the idea was that basically people would play video games on their cell phones, which at the time was kind of a ridiculous proposition, but we felt like data and internet was coming to cell phones, and we should be the media company basically to write about that change. And so we built that up and sold it. But the overall experience was just by giving buyers, our customers, advertisers, as something that they could get their hands on and experience themselves, it changes the entire sales cycle. So when we started Yesware, we were very focused on putting something in the hands of a salesperson that they could experience themselves and therefore get the emotional benefit of the product before they actually purchased it. And that actually worked, and I think that's sort of, I think, the core product goal for a product-led company is to get the end product in the hand of the end user as quickly as possible with as few barriers as possible, so that they can get the benefit. And then you say, well, to get that benefit ongoing, you have to pay for it. And that's what we've done at BodesWell as well. And I'll tell you more about BodesWell in the course of this conversation. But this is a topic near and dear to my heart, so I appreciate the chance to talk with you experts about it.
Absolutely. Chris, thank you so much for joining us today. So Chris is at IBM and doing some big things over there. Chris, why don't you give us a quick intro?
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate that, Jorge. So I think you and I connected through the firecracker.
Yeah.
Larry. Yeah.
Shout out to Larry.
Yeah,
Larry Long.
The biggest ball of energy anyone will ever meet. Right? Larry's just through the roof. Currently a platform product manager at IBM in their healthcare division. So healthcare is kind of like my passion, my background. Started off in genetics research, so mutating genes, studying the effect of crude oil, those spills overseas, kind of what happens to those fish, right? What genes do those affect? So knocking genes out and expressions of genes, doing that for the better part of 2 years. And then fell in love with technology and the impact at scale that you could actually amass with tech. And I always believed my purpose was to improve the human condition and to heal. So technology, allowed me to realize I can do that at scale, right? So picked up computer science and did some data science work at IBM. And then that turned into me still having an entrepreneurial itch. I started the entry-level phases of a health tech startup and still had that itch. So that's how I fell into kind of product management, right? Still wanting to build from a certain perspective. And that's where I am now and been for the past almost 2 years, IBM in healthcare. So it's super interesting, being product led at a big company, right? Big tech is an interesting thing of its own. And it's a very interesting paradigm between kind of revenue driven and product led and that balance, right? So when you look at like shareholders and the tradition of a company versus where you should be moving or where you could be moving, right? It's an interesting ebb and flow that you have to deal with. So excited to be a part of the panel and talk more about it.
Awesome. And last but not least in this first part, so we asked these folks who are super busy to come on and chat about product led here for a little bit, and then the second half of today's call, we're going to have a different set of folks. Edgar, who's a VC here in Miami, it's so interesting how the VCs have been really driving product led, and you very much focus on product led there at the Venture City in Miami. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your background and how did you get into that role?
For sure, Novel. Thank you, Jorge, for the invitation, and nice to meet everyone. So our main connection is I work with the Venture City, which is an operator-led venture acceleration model. We have a venture capital fund that we're in our second one, but our main kind of engine is our product-led growth program. And this is a 5-month program where we work with early stage startups across industries and from, at least in this part of the world, from Miami, both in North and South America. So we cover all the Americas. And yes, like Jorge said, during those 5 months, we primarily focus on the product, but more the tech and the engineering part of the company so that they can continue their growth afterwards. And now that Miami is gaining so much momentum and it's super on the map, in front of everyone's eyes, we want to make sure that the companies, although they don't all have to be based in Miami, are getting the exposure, whether it be from Latin American market to the US or from the US to the rest of the world. So we focus on this. And prior to the Venture City, I was working in another VC in Colombia, but also with companies in the US. And so that's when I first started getting involved with tech startups and more as an investor, because earlier I was in consulting in the Middle East. So did kind of the switch. So working with the bigger companies, and now super excited to be working with early stage founders and with this new model.
Awesome. Well, let's go around in the horn here and maybe define for the folks out there, what the hell is product led? Tim, why don't we start off with you? What's your take on this topic?
Yeah, I mean, I think Matthew had a great kind of kernel of a definition, which is most product-led companies, you're getting the value or sort of the product into the hands of the end user, and usually that manifests in sort of like a self-service product. So rather than having to go, traditional enterprise motion of, hey, you go to a website, you see, oh, this looks interesting to me, I want to try it. Then you click, give me a demo. You fill out, 15 fields of your social security number and what kind of car you drive and all this different information before a salesperson, eventually talks to you. And by the way, that salesperson is going to make you talk to them for 20 minutes or 30 minutes to make sure you're qualified into seeing the demo. And then you get to talk to a real salesperson and actually see maybe the product, or maybe not, we'll see. And so that's like the traditional process that's, typified enterprise sales and enterprise technology for most of the time enterprise software has existed. And really in the last 5 to 10 years, products like Yesware and maybe products like Slack and Zoom and Crowdcast and tons of different products have come out where you can just get started as an end user and get to value very quickly in a self-service way, often in a free product. And then over time, as you adopt it in your sort of enterprise organization, you'll often hit sort of gates where there's additional features or functionality that start to cost money, or based on after you get to a certain level of usage, then above that amount there starts to be sort of a paid element that kicks in. And so going a lot more detail than that, but that's sort of the meaning behind product led. And I think it has tons of ramifications for how companies make money and how they go to market.
I have a question real quick for everyone, and Chris, maybe you can speak to this. For me, product led has always insinuated, at least in my mind, an SMB product, because I thought for the longest time, if it's a free trial, then it's certainly going to be something for like the long tail or an SMB. But you're at IBM and they don't get any bigger than IBM, and like, what does product led mean for a large enterprise organization that has, I don't know, hundreds of SKUs, I'm guessing, across a massive organization?
Yeah, right. Yeah, very insightful question. So it's a paradigm shift, right? Especially not only big tech, but big tech that's been around, right? So IBM has a very long history of being in business, right, at different levels. So specifically in big tech, the ability for you to move in a direction, because you can think of so many problems that huge organizations have, right? So usually what you'll see in big tech is it's really hard in onboarding, in upgrading, right? So those avenues and those fields, it's extremely hard to have a very intuitive and usable experience, right? Which tends to lend itself to smaller companies. So when you think about product led at scale, it's much as just as it is a thought process and a shift, it's an actual cultural shift in a company, right? Because when you come from revenue led, your decision making, right? So Tim said itself, right, has a lot of ramifications on revenue, and depending on the company's history, right? If you've been going to shareholders and preaching revenue, right? How do you get in a product led form? And some of the times, there's a lot of examples, right, where product led, a lot of companies will have a loss leader as a product, right, just to get them in and upsell. Big tech doesn't usually do that, right? You don't really put out things that don't make money, right, or that are truly around the user's experience, right? That, you know, a lot of the revenue decisions, you know, don't necessarily have the user in mind. So at scale, it's definitely a paradigm shift and a cultural shift as well when you're thinking about product led.
Got it. And you know, Edgar, you're working with smaller companies now. Are you seeing any of your startups like not going product led, and kind of what's the chatter amongst these early stage startups right now?
So they all have, yeah, for the program, they all have to be the ones we're working with completely product led. For some, right, we do have to kind of open their mind before we start working together, because it's the methodology that we use, and that's where our team members are all coming from as well. But the chatter is that because they're smaller teams, they also know that they can't afford to have a completely separate sales team, right? If they were follow a different model. So I think it maximizes their time and their resources to all be product driven, whether it be a 3-person team or at most, let's say, a 10-person team. And I think that's how they've been able to see more of the impact of not only the program, but of their trajectory with their company. So they've envisioned it. And of course, you hear more of it. And because we only work with software companies, it makes it smoother as well. So we do, for some, have to open their mind to it, right? A change in mentality, but they've embraced it very well. So,
hey, you know, Matthew, what's so interesting about this group of folks chatting now is that we've had like Matthew, who's built this company before the trend, some investors, you know, Chris, who's at a massive company thinking about this. One of the things I remember when we were trying to do product led at a startup called Kick Apps, and this was probably about 13 years ago. And of course, that term didn't exist at that time, but we had this like freemium model at the very bottom, long tail, with the idea that, you know, they would grow and they would use it for free and then, yeah, I think the next tier was like $10 or something, right? And then we also at the same time were selling mid-market enterprise deals at, you know, I think some of the larger deals were in the $500,000 range. But one of the things that we noticed was, and this touches various organizations or part of the company, is that like I would or someone would call up the Pepsi, right, one of their target accounts, and say, hey, you know, do the pitch, and someone at Pepsi would say, oh yeah, we're already using you, we're paying $10 a month, and we're really happy with it, right? And then you know, I mean, I remember those phone calls. You'd just see the salesperson throw the phone against the wall, go, oh my god, that thing that's a total loss, you know, for the business. And I remember us looking at the financials, and we were looking at where all the revenue was. Yes, we had most of the, you know, it's the 80-20 thing, right? Most of the users were in that free to like $10 whatever tier it was, but we were no, it was not even close to being profitable for us. And of course, most of the revenue and profitability was coming from the top of the market customers. And so we eventually killed that long tail business. And what was crazy is we had two different organizations working on these two customer segments or product segments, right? And they were fighting, right? So how did you do it? Like, my question is, how the hell did you actually like execute this where you were able to drive bottoms up and make it happen? I mean, Yesware is still, crushing it today.
I think it gets back to a couple of the earlier points just about how product led is not like a revenue strategy; it's a company strategy. It's a marketing strategy. It has product implications, obviously, but it has a sales implication. It has service implication. It has company strategy, investor implications. And so I think it doesn't work as like a trial. It only works as a strategy for the company. And that's why it's impressive to think of like IBM having product lines that are driven by product led, because that is the essence of the enterprise sales driven company. But on a case-by-case basis, you can pick it out. You just have to have the whole thing aligned. So in your story about like the free and the $10 a month and then the Pepsi buyer, like that salesperson needs to be super well equipped with what the value proposition is to upsell to the enterprise, product. And the fact that they're using it already is good. Like you want that, right? You want people at Pepsi to use your product by definition. The thing is that the salesperson didn't have either the right battle card or the right product to sell the $50,000 version. So that's not his fault, and it's definitely not the free product's fault. It's the enterprise product's fault, and those things are not aligned. So like in BodesWell is my latest company, and it's all about financial planning, like helping people figure out how the complexities of their financial life are going to work out. And what to do about it to live the life that you want to live. Now, we're not a B2C company. We're building this for big enterprises. So we have a product-led strategy, which is you can go to BodesWell.io, put in your information, build your life plan the way you want it to be, and it's free, because that's a demo for the product managers at the largest financial services companies in the world to come and try it out themselves and think, oh, how would this work for all of my 10 million customers? As long as it's aligned, I think it works perfectly. But if it's not aligned, then it's a disaster.
And how are you seeing that, Chris? I know you're on the product side, and you're sort of in the middle of everything going on. Are you seeing any sort of like, I don't want to say issues or problems, because we don't want to say that, be negative out here, but I'm sure like you're seeing some interesting things going on where you maybe have legacy products or models having to now update, and that taking some time to actually adapt, even just SaaS, right?
Yeah, it's tough, right? Simple answer is it's tough, right? For big organizations with legacy tooling, code bases, and products to be able to move at a pace that somebody at a startup can, right? So that salesperson really has to you have to understand that value that you bring in the room. I can't tell you how many calls I've been on where the products that the last team I was on, we had some pretty compelling competitors, right? Who were doing product-led really, really well, right? To the point where they barely hire salespeople. They're just that good at what they're doing, right? And what's interesting is when you see the startup, or at that point, probably really large, middle-sized organization, become really good at product-led, right? And start to really compete at a big enterprise level. That's where things get super interesting from a competitive standpoint, right? From an internal standpoint, as competing against that, right? We're also trying to transform into product-led, right? I think a lot of IBM has. But when you're dealing with legacy work, for one specific point of yours, you talked about upgrading it, right? Making it, the UI or user experience, right? You got to pull in people that know, right? You have to have a design team in place, right? You have to really build a vision for people to really say, look, we're going to go and start design thinking, right? We're going to go and start really being empathetic, really understanding our users, right? And so a lot of things you have to naturally rethink, right? How you've been doing business, right? You have these huge marketing and sales teams, right? And that's how you've worked for I don't know how long. So from an issue perspective, and I think we can call them challenges, right? The challenges with that, again, in a big company, it's mindset, right? It's a cultural thing. So at a startup company, right, in my experience, you can affect change a lot quicker, and it could spread a lot quicker, right? At a big organization, especially one that's been in business as long time as IBM or other organizations, what you run into is a cultural change that has to happen, but it's not only within your product, right? IBM has attained in so many different markets that my team and my product definitely interacts with the product, in a different part of IBM. So IoT and healthcare, or, finance and quantum or something like that, right? So you're not only dealing with your product and being product led and trying to affect change there, you're doing it across the organization. And those things take time, right? So that's the biggest challenge that you'll have at a 400,000 plus company, like an IBM.
Yeah, because go for it, like Matt.
I just want to ask Chris a question about that, because like one of the limitations of the product-led strategy is that it's much easier to do it with a standalone product that is a person, especially just software only, that an end user could get and absorb and use and benefit from immediately. It's much more difficult as the product has to be embedded within an enterprise in order to get benefit from it. And it's very difficult to do it if it has any hardware component, right? So like, how do you, for your product particularly, especially with regulatory environment and HIPAA and other medical issues, like how do you do a product-led product when it's like it's got like hardware and software, and it's got to be embedded, and it's got all these regulatory issues?
Yeah, great question. And the simple one again is it's hard, right? It starts off, again, always coming back to mentality, but you have to put it in practice, right? And in the first part, so Matthew mentioned very, very good points here, right? One is doing it with multiple products involved, right? Having that strategy. And the second is in heavily regulated environments, right? So you can think, ISO, FDA, globally GDPR, right? The MDR for medical device in Europe. So these type of things really constrain, right, the stuff you're trying to do in product led. You have to really have the knowledge to work with the system, right? Because when the system is bigger than you, right, you don't go out and defeat it, right? You don't go out and say, I'm going to compete hand in hand with the FDA to try to get them to change the regulation, right? It's within the existing infrastructure of what you're given, right, in your regulations. How can you, where can you add, right, that empathy? Where can you add that product-led strategy, right, to start to make a new paradigm, right? Because what you've been operating in historically is, okay, this is the process, just like as it is today. I have to get this regulation, meet these requirements. It takes time, there's documentation, right? You really have to understand your process and take it apart. And that takes time. It takes people who believe in product led to sit down and talk to decision makers, right? And it happens for me. I think IBM and a lot of big companies get a rap for top-down approaches, right? But in a company, right, that's trying to evolve, that is evolving and that has evolved historically, you really have to be the champion, right? And I'm talking to all my product managers here. I'm talking to all my people in the organization, because when you think about product led, everybody gets tagged as a stakeholder in that product, right? And so that approach to change happens with me, right? That's the shift that has to happen. I need to go not to my director, I need to go to my GM, right? The top of my unit. I need to go to my VP, I need to go to my director, and I need to say, this is where we need to head. And I have to have a compelling business case. Because let's be real about it, right? At a big company, you have to validate, right? You have to validate the why. So you have to have people who know about product led and understand it. In the regulatory environment, you have to have people who understand the environment, which you do, right? And then you have to have friends with the products that you're connected with, right? That who also believe. So it's a lot of persuasion going on in that regard. But that's how you have to get change done. You cannot wait on the market of big tech to become product led. If you do that, we will fail. That's as simple as that. When you start caring about your users less, or you start caring about your users later on than everybody else, you lose. And you can't afford to do that. So.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that, Chris. It's so interesting because, we tend to not sort of think about those regulatory issues, generally speaking, right? Especially as a salesperson, I want to sell everything all the time, and it really is a huge issue, particularly in these like legacy or older school segments or markets where you had HIPAA, you had privacy issues. I was chatting with someone about product-led recently that was in the financial space, and they were like, yeah, we don't know how to really do product-led with, I think they were like an investment banking organization. And so thank you for sharing that. I just wanted to introduce Brendan Short, who just joined us. We're just hanging out. You know what this reminds me of? Do you remember Jason Calcanis and those folks? They do that like podcast where they're just like hanging out in their homes talking a
The
little bit.
all in pod, I believe it's called.
Something like that, right? Yeah, it's cool. But Brendan, why don't you take a quick second to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your background and how the hell did you get into what you're doing right now, and then talking product led.
Yeah, sure. So good to meet you guys. A couple folks that I know here. Good to see you as well. So yeah, I've been kind of in B2B SaaS for the past 10 years or so, and was consulting after my last gig for Zoom and a couple other clients, and then the pandemic hit, and ended up jumping on board with them full time. And I was consulting for them like January, February, March, and then jumped on with them a month or two after that. So definitely have seen firsthand the opportunity of having a ton of data. But I think finding the best ways to bubble that up at the right time, into the right hands. These are all more complex problems than I think they appear on the surface. But it's definitely champagne problems. I think being at a company that had, I would call it kind of first party intent data, is, that's a superpower, right? And so figuring out the ways, the ways to kind of leverage that data, but then also the ways kind of over time to optimize the usage of that data is kind of the next layer that I'm starting to look into.
Can I take an opportunity to ask you a question, Brendan? Hi again.
Please do.
So Brendan and I got introduced, as happens these days, over LinkedIn. Somehow we're in like a LinkedIn conversation, and then all of a sudden he's like, "Hey, can I DM you?" And he DMs me this amazing piece of information, which I'd love you to share just your thinking on this, Brendan, because he's come up with like a pretty interesting idea on how he wants to sort of build things out at Zoom. And to the extent that you want to go into more detail, I think it'd be useful for folks to hear just like a click deeper into sort of what you're seeing over at Zoom and how you're thinking about it.
Yeah, totally. So specifically at Zoom, I do ops and enablement for the BDR team. So it's like 130 BDRs globally. They do all the outbound and starting to do some inbound as well. And so, yeah, trying to build out the playbook. We just have so much, Zoom definitely, but like I think most companies, they're all using 6, 8, 10 different tools to find data, right? To get data from all sorts of different data sources, including our own data, right? Which is housed in Snowflake and Redshift, whatever. And so as I was building out that playbook, it was like, this doesn't make sense to be in a Google Doc, right? Like this is a very difficult thing to build into a Google Doc and then enable folks around. Like this has to be actually operationalized, or else it just doesn't scale, because they're having to log into literally 8 different systems, right? And different technologies. So Yeah, basically, and I'm still in kind of the process of figuring this out exactly, but trying to figure out the best way to build, call it kind of a normalization layer across those different, both third-party intent data sources and first-party intent data sources, to pull that all into one single place and then build logic on top of it, right? So to be able to say, for a certain threshold, so Pardot, for instance, everyone uses Pardot or something similar. When you're using Pardot, there's a score that you can build. And you really only want to look at old leads once they bubble back up, right? Once they show a certain engagement level. So that would be one example of a data source and a specific data point that I would want to build kind of a lever into, and have that automatically bubble back up into the workflow of the rep who owns the account associated with that lead. And I'm trying to think of ways to basically do this across, again, 8 different data sources, but then within each of those 8 different data sources, there's, a dozen different data points that I care about. And then you can start stack ranking it and building logic on top of that. But that's I think companies we don't need an algorithm or machine learning even for that. Sure, that's magical and raises venture capital, but I think that there's actually, at least for a mature company, there's so much still to be done just on building kind of, call it simple logic around the data that the company has access to. So, yeah.
Thanks, Brendan. As you know, we agree with you. So I would say Zoom is obviously at the top level in terms of complexity and amount of data and amount of people just on the ground doing this. But we've talked to a lot of companies that are even smaller that sort of have the same problem. And the macro trend that at least we're seeing is this explosion of first party data, like you described, and then SaaS tools that people are using and it's also generating data. And so it's just a ton of complexity, and it's not getting less complex; it's getting more complex. Would love to maybe hear your thoughts, Jorge, since you've been the moderator so far. I'd love to hear what you're seeing at Reprise and some of the unique aspects of the product there and what your customers are seeing. I maybe give you an opportunity to talk a little bit about what you're doing at the company, and then just hear sort of how people are getting value from Reprise and sort of converting to ProductLed.
Yeah, well, thank you. I'm usually the one asking questions, so I appreciate it. First of all, we're early and we're still in our finding product market fit, right? We have a set of customers now, but we got a lot of work to do moving forward. But to answer your question, there's a couple things that we've seen. So the first one is of course, marketing, and this was the part of the inspiration for that post that I think you two met on when we were chatting. I thought about product-led experiences, and immediately I thought to myself of the self-serve funnel that MailChimp has done for such a long time, and I didn't have to talk to a salesperson. It was completely product-led, and I think they're still product-led. I don't know if they've actually ever moved up, and they've been able to nail it. I think they have a huge business there, and there's other attributes that it has that as a business that makes it pretty unique. But I always thought about product-led being marketing and owned by marketing and marketing driven. And what I started to see when I got to Reprise, and I think I kind of knew this a little somewhat intuitively, because at MoPub, you remember, Tim, ad tech is very, very much a very interesting long tail where you would have an app developer. And I have to say, Tim and I, we got involved with mobile and that whole ecosystem pretty early. So we were able to see the Zyngas of the world happen, right? And so I remember when they had hundreds of downloads, and now forget it, right? Well, I don't know how it is now, but certainly became very big businesses during their time. And so we wouldn't talk to people unless they had a certain level of engagement, right? And so so I always thought about it again, I didn't think that SaaS really in the enterprise or or folks that were selling to the mid market as well would ever really go product led because I just saw these issues. But then I started to realize, well, product led doesn't necessarily have to be top of the funnel, right? Like you could have a product led experience is what one of the things that we're enabling, where, instead of demoing the production environment, particularly like you can't, Chris, your sales reps can't demo healthcare data, right? Like real stuff. I mean, it'd be totally insane and impossible, right? But if you were able to create a piece of technology, when again, I don't want to sell what we're doing now, but I think there's other players in the space that are emerging doing this. But if you were able to give like an SDR some sort of like product demo that now fit into their, like plugged into their CRM, and then serve them data around specific usage, that's product led, right? Like you can now use that inside the data, and then this actual tool to be able to drive that sale. And so it kind of looks more like a hybrid approach, right? Now there are certainly organizations that have a completely self-serve model, and they'll just swipe a credit card and continue to move forward. But I think these hybrid models really allow for more flexibility and larger deals. Now, I do believe that there will be a point where we're going to continue to see like deal sizes being done self-serve. Maybe Bitcoin helps with that. I'm not sure what it actually looks like. So, but I don't actually believe that for the time being at least, that it's going to be a completely self-serve funnel. So what am I seeing? So I don't know, just if that answers your question completely, but what I'm seeing is that it's not completely just like long tail, mid-market and enterprise. There are ways to integrate this product-led experience throughout the sales cycle, and that the hybrid approach is really growing. And I think it's going to be really popular moving forward. And the other thing is, like, you could have a product-led top of the funnel being just a lead source, right? That's giving you data, and you'll still be able to have that product-led self-serve experience, self-education sort of experience at the top of the funnel, and then roll into the hybrid experience that's human-assisted at further down the funnel at different parts. So that's what I'm seeing. Of course, we're evangelizing that, and we'll see how it shakes out.
Thanks, Jorge. That was great. And I would say from what we're seeing as well, we work with a lot of developer-focused companies. So like they have a developer tools, or kind of bottoms up developers, individuals can start using it, and then all of a sudden, too many developers are using it. There needs security policies need to be in place. That's when sales starts to get involved, and you need to have some level of product understanding to do that. And in between Twitter and doing this company, I actually worked at a developer tools company, which is kind of how I became in love with product led from that experience. Matthew, I'd love to hear. So one thing on that, I have a question for Matthew now, and based on maybe his experience at Yesware or BodesWell. A lot of the companies that we're working with who have self-serve businesses, like the MailChimp example you gave earlier, Jorge, and then a lot of these developer-focused companies as well, they have the self-serve business, and they almost kind of put it over here. And then they have their enterprise business as well, where it's a little bit more sales-driven. There's still some product-led aspects, but they almost leave the self-serve business, alone to some extent, because that's credit card. It's smaller ACVs, to your point, very small in some cases. Was that your experience at Yesware? Did you have kind of I know you had a self-serve business. Did you kind of leave that alone and then had a more traditional sales process, or how did you guys figure out that sort of mix at Yesware? How do you think about
it? The transition from self-serve to sales-driven is incredibly difficult to get right, so I think it is very company specific. My experience was that the best customers that we had at Yesware, and I think we're still seeing this. I'm still involved in Yesware. I'm still on the board, so I'm still seeing this kind of success pattern, which is organic adoption from the bottoms up end users, and then the enterprise comes in and says, what the hell is this? How does this work? How does this help me? And as long as you have a good story for how it helps the enterprise as well as the end user, then you can do a big corporate sale. So ideally, like the arc should just be one continuous line of penetration into the customer and then partnership from there. But that's not always true, depending on the product and the way the product is architected. So some companies do segregate the two out, but I think that's not ideal and actually not like a great example of a product-led company, actually. Just two different product lines.
Yeah, I would say the experience that I've seen there is often with companies that have started not product-led and then layered on product-led after the fact. And a lot of those companies are actually in the developer tools space for one reason or another. And they've seen the bottoms-up adoption from usually open source. And then they have an enterprise kind of layer there. So it's interesting to see the different trends here. I'd love to give maybe Edgar a chance to chime in and hear, from the earliest stage perspective, since you're a VC, it sounds like you're working at kind of that earliest stage. What are you seeing, and what do you recommend maybe to your portfolio companies that are starting out as product-led companies? Day one, what are the sort of recommendations you give to companies who think about, this product and go-to-market strategy and sort of architecting it? How do you advise your companies, and what are the key things to think about?
So first off, we advise them right from the beginning to talk to the customers as much as possible. So I know, Chris, you touched on this on your users. Because there are smaller teams, right? Many times the founders come with the mentality of what their value is and what they want to sell with their product or the platform, and instead we get them to really talk to those users, right? And if they don't have, at the moment, they're not generating revenue, then talk to those potential customers to try to get as much feedback, right? Because they come with a mentality and that they're convinced, they're building a kick-ass product, but we want to make sure that the other side of that relationship is also the values that is perceived is actually received, right? That it's experienced. And so by them talking to as many of those customers and those users, then they go back to their teams and kind of, implement those changes and that feedback. So we advise all the founders from the very beginning to listen to your customers, and that's what keeps them, your users, to keep you iterating as much as possible and tweaking things, right? And because you're a smaller team, you're able to make those changes more rapidly. So it's better and it's easier to do those mistakes early on, right? And so don't fear of having to change something or go back to the drawing board if your users aren't really communicating that your product is, the solution that you believe it is. So we advise them to do this earlier so that it doesn't, you don't continue to build new features and maybe launch new versions with misconceptions. And with that, then we also, that feeds into their growth strategy. So if it's go-to-market strategy, when it comes time for that, they're able to really identify the target markets. In our case, if it's a company from Brazil, then maybe, it's a huge monster for market. But at the same time, we tell them, okay, talk to your users outside of your home market, right? Or where are you looking to expand? Because ultimately that product and that value could be perceived completely different in another market, right? So if their next step is to move to the US, we tell them, test your hypothesis, of course, but always keep it in mind what that product value that you want to commit to and you want to transmit really is getting to the other side. So everything comes back to, of course, as Brendan mentioned, the data, right? We tell them, listen to your data as possible. Many of the companies that we work with have amazing data, but they don't have it instrumented, they don't have it analyzed. And we tell you, okay, not only test your hypothesis, listen to the qualitative feedback, but go back to that data, right? And really find out what it is telling you of your current product usage, of course, your retention and your engagement, but also any new features or new implementations or versions. So combined with listening to your users and listening to the data, that's where all of our work really focuses on, and we advise them to.
I had a quick question for Brendan, because Brendan's also been a founder CEO in the past, and Brendan, and maybe also, well, you're going to be going through this, or I think you're going through this, Tim, and certainly Matt's gone through this. How do you balance being product-led early days when you got to do customer interviews, you got to do all the unscalable, non-product-led stuff to figure out what the hell the product-led or the product should be moving forward?
Yeah, totally. I mean, this is kind of the classic, art versus science or qualitative versus quantitative. I think it's the same thing, right? It's not either or, it's both. And so, yeah, very much so, like, subscribe to David Sachs, speaking of All In podcast, David Sachs had a good Twitter thread on this when Slack got acquired, around that they should, they executed flawlessly, but they should have layered in tops down sales earlier, and they would have had a better outcome had they done that. That was his opinion. I tend to agree with that. And so I don't think product-led growth is a replacement for enterprise sales. That obviously gets the deal size over 100K or whatever that metric is that you're looking for. But then, yeah, for the early stage startups, it also, you need a direct communication with your customer. So you want to look at the data and you want to look at quantifiable things, but you also need that qualitative thing, right? So as a founder, it was conversations that I was having, 10, 15 conversations a day with potential buyers. And you can, see or hear in their voice, like when something resonates or when it doesn't, right? And so then you can double down on that or triple down on that. And you don't get that sort of leading indicator with just data, right? So I think from the perspective, especially for startups, but I mean, even at a company like Zoom, you have to be talking to your customers every single day. You can't just look at data and expect to get insights from that. And I think that also, that is a flywheel for a bunch of things, right? It's not just for this sales cycle funnel. Like, it's also for product messaging, it's for features, it's for prioritization of the roadmap, it's for marketing content. Like, there's a lot of things that you want to be capturing in those conversations, in addition to kind of the product-led side of things. Yeah, I'm curious if other people have thoughts on that, though.
I mean, I can, I'll give my quick thoughts, and I'd love to hear everyone else's thoughts too. But for me at least, we're doing the unscalable talking to customers thing right now, and I think there's a couple reasons for that are unique to the type of product that we're building and the problem we're solving, the way we're solving it. Because I think we actually can't do a true product-led strategy day one right now. I think we'll get there over time, but right now we have to talk to everybody and understand a lot of the data, messy data stuff that Brendan knows full well. And so that's important to have kind of direct conversations with customers, and regardless. And I would say my other point, maybe to add on to Brendan's comment, is that there are some companies that I think can do product led from day one and maybe avoid talking to customers, at least in a sales context. And that's these developer tools companies, especially open source. So if you're offering a freemium product and you're backed by venture capital, you can go, for a decent amount of time without, layering on sort of monetization, just to get adoption. And so you see companies like Elastic, MongoDB, Confluent, which has Kafka as an open source project, Databricks, which has Spark, which just raised money at a $30 billion valuation. A lot of these companies, before they even layered on a big sort of go-to-market and monetization motion, they were getting tons of adoption of free users for their open source product, and they were no doubt talking to those users to understand how they were using the free product. But it was less of like a sales conversation and more of just this like customer understanding or development thing, which has to happen regardless. But I think that's an interesting component here of product-led, that's a little bit different than some of the traditional B2B SaaS sort of strategies you can employ. I'd love to hear other folks on how they think of that question. I think it's a really good one for you.
I've just been reading, the Twilio founders book, Ask Your Developer. And it's all about that, right? Like, they started by asking the question, what would it be like if you could make a phone call from your product? And he just went around and asked a bunch of developers that and saw them light up, and then they went and built that API. And he talks about how again and again in the first 3 years, they just talked to developers all the time about what they needed and how they wanted to make their API better and extend the API. And so I don't think you ever get around talking to customers. I don't think there is a world in which customers are not the center of a business if it's a successful business. But the benefit of the product-led strategy is that you're not gated by the salesperson. I mean, in a sense, a product-led strategy is a failure of sales to do a good job in getting the product out to the market. And so it's basically saying like with a movie, right? You're going to release a movie, you're going to do a trailer for the movie. So the product-led strategy is the trailer for your big enterprise product. And so how do you get that out there to people? Well, that's easy with the internet. Thank you, internet. But you still need a salesperson that'd be like, okay, now here's how this general experience applies to you, particular company, and how it fits into your overall world. And that's a much more in-depth communication thing that earns a big enterprise sales contract.
I have a question for everyone, and this is certainly related to product and then sales process. We've been having this big, not argument, but we've been having a lot of fun with it. The conversations get a little heated sometimes around, do you do discovery on the first call, right? And or do you show product, go product led first? They do it essentially. Let's say you're in SDR AE, you do demo and then sort of integrate discovery into demo, and then after you've shown the product, there's this sort of expectation now, I think, that you already understand what the product is for the most part, at a high level, of course, and then kind of weave in a new form of discovery after they've already seen the product. What's your take on that? And the one thing I'll add to that is I know I was listening to a buddy of mine, Adam O'Donnell's podcast. He had Doug Landis from Emergence Capital, an old box guy. And he said that the future of SDRs is not what it is now. It's a product. He called it like a product specialist, where their folks are already integrating with your product in some way, and then now you're there to kind of unblock them. What's your take on all that kind of stuff I just said? Maybe whoever wants to dive in there.
I'll take it. I mean, I think that's a great question, and every company is different. I think this is part of the art of sales. Why salespeople are never going to go away. It's because when you do engage with someone who's interested in learning more and trying to figure it out, obviously the product-led approach works for a lot of companies where there's no sales involvement. To Matt's point earlier, and the failing of sales is why product-led exists, and I do agree with that. But at a certain point, people have questions, and often salespeople are the ones that are tasked with answering those. And so you want to have some discovery, sure, of course, to make sure that the person you're talking to is worth your time, because time is the one finite resource. But then you kind of make a decision, or I've instructed teams to make a call on whether or not to switch from sort of the classic discovery mode to people are sort of really feel good about how the conversations go, and you kind of move right into kind of more showing the product. So that's more of the traditional tactics that I grew up doing, but I think it's still relevant today in some in a lot of places. We had one question from the gallery here that maybe we can ask to close out before we're done. Sure. In the last couple of minutes, from Diana, my co-founder, actually, and our head of product. So I wanted to get it in. She asks, I'm sure the relationship between product and sales orgs is completely different at PLG companies. What are some strategies to tighten that feedback loop? What are some metrics you might look at to figure out how to incentivize a sales org? So a couple good ones in there. I'd love to hear from Chris, because probably there's a good amount of coordination that needs to occur at IBM between product and sales, especially as you're layering on product-led. How do you guys think about this in terms of that feedback loop? And you're obviously a product manager, so I'd love to hear how you guys interact with the sales side.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, every company is different. I also think that relationship differs between the complexity of the product, right? Because when you look at products that are really complex, when having conversations with new clients or prospects, right? You really need to understand what they're using it for, especially if the product is vast and robust and has a lot of different use cases. You really want to understand the needs when they're coming to the table for a conversation. As far as the overall interaction between myself as a PM and sales, it's super tight, right? To the extent of sales is coming and saying, how do I win in this room, right? You're the product expert, right? How do I win in this room with X, Y, and Z competitor? And for me, I appreciate that direct, how do I win, right? And on the opposite end, I'm interested in where are we losing, right? You're going into the room, and before you can even get started, what's smacking you in the face, right? What is stopping us? And so what you'll see a lot in organizations is And it's something I really like to differentiate between. A lot of people hear product led, and that they think that means product management led. So they think that the PMs are on a pedestal, and in product led, that's not the case, right? Everybody is a stakeholder in that product. No one discipline owns anything else. So when somebody's talking, a salesperson is coming to me telling me what they're not getting right in the room, I really value that opinion, because you are on the front lines getting hit with all of the no's, rejection after rejection after rejection. Like, you're the person I want to talk to. Besides the client, you're probably the second person I want to talk to frequently, right? What is going on? How can we move better, right? What's happening in this market, right? I think sales is a great point for that. And the first thing I ask when I have any introductory conversations, specifically with sales, is how can I make your job easier, right? There's a lot of nitpicky things that come into play about what they like about personality types, but after the first 10 minutes of the conversation, you'll start to really dig out how to better help and aid your sales organization in bringing home the deals. And the big challenge is having a strong relationship with sales isn't a challenge, right? It's super easy. We're all people, right? It's super easy to connect with another person. The challenge is, again, in bigger organizations, when you don't directly control how they're incentivized, right? If sales is incentivized in a way that is not conducive to product led, that's where the real digging has to happen. And again, goes back to that culture change, right? You could have issues with professional services or a business partner and their services, right? So let's say your sales team is incentivized to sell your partner services over your internal professional services, right? That's something that happens, right? Especially with complex products, right? Where you can't just swipe a credit card and get started. You need somebody to help set it up and get you going, right? So it's really about a connection with your sales team and just opening up, right? What do we need to do to move better? And I think that's a huge part of being product led, because it's the impetus of that is empathy, right? And when you build that up for not only your clients but internal folks, you start to see some really powerful movement and evangelism for product led.
Awesome.
Thanks, Chris. That's great.
Thank you so much. Well, we're at the top of the hour. I know folks are busy out there, so definitely want to go ahead and wrap it up. And thank you so much for everyone's time here, Matt. Great to see you. I will never forget Matthew Bellows flying into Palo Alto, 2012, I think it was 2012 or 2013, flies from Boston to Palo Alto to do an event with me while the Red Sox were in the World Series. And I think they won that night, and you were on stage. And I was like, I didn't
They did. They won
you
that
remember
night,
they won
yeah.
that night? And I was like,
Yeah,
and
they
here
did,
he
yeah.
is, Matt, just to tell you the kind of guy that Matt is. He like honors that, flies in, I think maybe just for a night or something. And while his home team is winning, plus running, being a CEO of Yesware, which was the hottest, company and really the only real company in that category at that time. So it was doing a lot. So thank you so much, Chris. It was wonderful to meet you. I'm gonna give Larry a hug when I see him. I gotta go over there to Raleigh and go and give him a nice hug. And if anyone's interested, I posted Larry's LinkedIn profile on the chat because he's got a great podcast that's super cool. Edgar, thank you so much for coming on the show. And if there are any good deals, please let me know. I'll talk to you after. Brendan, wonderful to see you. You and I have known each other for a couple of years in the ecosystem in Silicon Valley, so it's wonderful to see you continuing to kick ass, and we should connect offline. Tim, thank you for helping out with this and partnering to do this. But we're going to try to continue to have these kinds of conversations and keep learning from each other, because I certainly walk away with some nuggets here today that weren't really obvious to me before. So thank you so much.
Thanks,
And,
Jorge.
yeah, thank you. And one more thing for everyone. I posted folks out there in the audience, I posted everyone's LinkedIn URL. So definitely connect with these rock stars, and we'll see you on the next show or conversation or whatever we want to call these.
All right. See you later, man.
See you later.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you for having
Have
us.
a good one.
Take care. Bye-bye.